For years, Isabella Turner's life was controlled by her mother's lies, so convincing that the court believed her father was the villain. But behind closed doors, the truth was far darker: hidden bruises, tearful eyes, and a child's silent cries for help. In a courtroom built on deception, will Isabella find the courage to expose the truth before it's too late? Stay tuned to find out and tell us in the comments where you are watching from today. Isabella Turner sat rigidly beside her mother, Victoria Turner, in the cold courtroom, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her shoulders curled inward, her small frame hunched as if trying to disappear. Her eyes stayed fixed on her shoes, not daring to look up. Not at her father, not at the judge, and definitely not at Victoria. Victoria's hand rested on Isabella's knee, the grip firm, cold, her nails digging just enough to send a warning. Her voice was low, calm, perfectly measured. "No stories today, Isabella. No tears. Just stick to what we practiced." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes were sharp, unyielding. Isabella nodded, her chest tightening, fear coiling inside her. She knew better than to disobey. Across the room, Michael Anderson sat stiffly, his shoulders tense, his face pale. He looked older than Isabella remembered, his eyes tired and sunken. But when his gaze met hers, his expression softened, his eyes warm with love and worry. Her chest ached, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to run to him, to feel his arms around her again, to tell him everything. But she stayed still, her body frozen, Victoria's grip a cold reminder of what disobedience would cost. Judge William Monroe entered, his presence commanding the room into silence. He sat tall, his face stern but kind, as his eyes moved to Isabella. His voice was firm, steady. "We are here to determine what is in the best interest of Isabella Turner." The words were heavy, final. Isabella's heart thudded painfully, her chest tightening. She felt Victoria's fingers press harder, her body stiffening. Rachel Williams, Michael's lawyer, stood, her posture poised, her voice strong. "Your Honor, we are here because Isabella has suffered emotional neglect and physical harm under Victoria Turner's care. We have medical records, financial statements, and witness testimony to prove this." Her tone was unwavering, her eyes sharp as she glanced at Victoria, who remained calm, composed, her face a mask of serene concern. Isabella's chest tightened, fear curling inside her. They knew. Her father knew. The truth was coming out. She felt Victoria's grip tighten, her mother's body rigid beside her. The lie was crumbling, the walls closing in. But she was too afraid to reach for freedom, too terrified of the consequences. Rachel continued, her voice clear and steady. "The medical records show a pattern of injuries consistent with physical abuse, bruises, fractures, and untreated wounds. We also have evidence of financial neglect, with child support funds spent on luxury vacations, while Isabella's medical needs went unmet." She turned to the judge, her expression hard. "This is not about imperfect parenting. This is about endangerment." The room was silent, tension heavy in the air. Isabella's body curled inward, her shoulders trembling. She felt exposed, vulnerable, the truth pressing in around her. But Victoria's hand stayed firm on her knee, her fingers digging in, a silent threat. "Don't you dare," her mother's voice whispered, low and venomous. Isabella's body went cold, her vision blurring as fear wrapped around her, heavy and suffocating. Victoria's lawyer, Gregory Lane, stood, his expression calm, composed. His voice was smooth, practiced. "Your Honor, my client is a single mother struggling to care for a chronically ill child. While she may not have been perfect, imperfection does not equate to unfitness. We have evidence that Isabella's injuries were the result of accidents, consistent with her medical condition." His words were confident, soothing, painting Victoria as a loving but overwhelmed mother. Isabella's stomach twisted, guilt settling heavily inside her. It was the same story Victoria had drilled into her head, the lie she had been forced to believe. She was sick. She was weak. She was a burden. It was easier to believe the lie than to face the consequences of breaking it. Her hands tightened in her lap, her body rigid, her eyes fixed on her shoes. She couldn't speak. She couldn't break the silence. The judge's gaze moved to Isabella, his eyes gentle but firm. "Isabella, I know this is difficult, but I need you to be honest with me. How did you get those bruises?" The words hung in the air, the room growing still. Isabella's chest tightened, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She felt Victoria's nails dig into her knee, sharp and cold, the pain grounding her, binding her to the lie. The practiced words sat on her tongue, waiting to be spoken. It would be so easy to say them, so easy to end this. She looked at her father, his face breaking, his shoulders sinking under the weight of worry and pain. His eyes were pleading, full of love, his hope wrapping around her, shielding her from the coldness that kept her silent. Her heart ached, her vision blurring as tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to tell him everything, to shatter the lie, to be free. But Victoria's grip tightened, her body tense, her eyes cold and sharp. The threat was clear. "You know what to say," her mother whispered, her voice soft but cold. "I fell. I'm just clumsy." Isabella's shoulders slumped, her voice trembling as she repeated the lie. "I fell. I'm just clumsy." The words were hollow, mechanical, heavy with guilt. Her chest tightened, shame twisting inside her. Her father's face crumpled, his hope shattering, his shoulders sinking. The judge nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Isabella. We'll continue tomorrow." His gavel struck, the sound echoing in the room, final and absolute. The session was over, but the battle had just begun. Isabella lay curled on her bed, staring at the ceiling, the words echoing in her mind. "I fell. I'm just clumsy." She had lied. She had protected Victoria's secret, just like always. Her chest tightened, her heart aching as she remembered her father's face, the way his hope had shattered. Downstairs, Victoria laughed, her voice light and triumphant. She did exactly as she was told. They believed every word. The sound was cold, cruel, twisting like a knife in Isabella's chest. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears slipping down her cheeks. She had betrayed him. She had let fear win again. Her fingers curled around the edge of her wig, the fabric soft and familiar. It was the shield that kept the truth hidden, the mask that Victoria had forced her to wear. She wanted to rip it off, to let the truth be seen, to shatter the lie. But fear wrapped around her, cold and heavy. "You'll never see him again," Victoria's voice echoed, sharp and menacing. "They'll take you away." Isabella's shoulders trembled, her chest tightening. She was trapped, voiceless, suffocated by Victoria's lies. But she remembered her father's face, the love in his eyes, the way he was still fighting for her. Her heart ached, hope flickering inside her, small but fierce. She couldn't stay silent, not anymore. Tomorrow, she would speak the truth. The courtroom felt colder than the day before, the air heavy with tension. Isabella sat rigidly beside Victoria, her body tense, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her chest felt tight, her heart racing as she replayed her decision over and over in her mind. Today, she would speak the truth. Victoria's fingers closed around Isabella's knee, firm and cold. Her nails dug in just enough to send a warning. "Same as yesterday," she whispered, her voice sweet but laced with ice. "Stick to the story. No tears, no drama. You're just clumsy, nothing more." Her lips curled into a serene smile, her face perfectly composed, but her eyes were sharp, unyielding. Isabella swallowed, her body curling inward. She nodded automatically, her throat tight. She could feel the fear wrapping around her, cold and heavy. But she held on to the flicker of courage that had kept her awake all night, burning inside her, fierce and determined. She was tired of lying, tired of being afraid. Judge William Monroe entered, his presence commanding the room into silence. He sat tall, his face stern, his eyes sharp. His gaze moved to Isabella, his expression softening. "Miss Turner, I'd like to hear from you again today. Please take the stand." Her legs felt heavy as she stood, her body moving on autopilot as she walked to the witness stand. Her hands shook as she sat down. She could feel every eye on her, watching, waiting. The lies sat on her tongue, practiced and perfect. "I fell. I'm just clumsy." It would be so easy to say, so easy to end this. But then she looked at her father. He was waiting for her, believing in her, fighting for her. Her chest ached, tears burning in her eyes. She remembered his hugs, his laughter, the way he used to call her his little Bella. He hadn't given up on her. He still loved her, even after all the lies. The judge's voice was gentle, his eyes kind. "Isabella, can you tell us how you got those bruises?" His tone was soft, careful, giving her the chance to speak. Her heart pounded, her chest heaving as she reached up, her fingers curling around the edge of her wig. It felt heavy, suffocating, the mask she had worn for so long. She looked at Victoria, whose face went white, eyes wide with horror. With one swift motion, she pulled off the wig. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as the bruises were revealed. Purple and blue marks marred her scalp. Some faded and yellowing, others fresh and angry. The silence was deafening, heavy with shock and disbelief. The truth was exposed, raw and undeniable. The judge's eyes widened, his face pale with shock. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth, her body rigid with disbelief. Michael's shoulders sagged, his face crumpling as tears filled his eyes. Isabella heard him choke back a sob, his love wrapping around her, warm and safe. Victoria's face twisted, her body rigid as she sank back into her chair, her eyes wide with horror. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her mask had shattered, the lie crumbling around her. Her power was gone. Her control was broken. The judge's voice was low, firm. "Isabella, who did this to you?" The question was simple but heavy, echoing through the room. His eyes were gentle, his tone soft, giving her the space to speak her truth. Isabella looked at her mother, whose face contorted with fury, her eyes flashing with cold rage. But she no longer felt fear. Victoria's power was gone, her threats hollow. Her voice was small but clear, trembling but strong. "She did. My mom did this." Her words shattered the silence, cutting through the lie, breaking the chains that had held her captive for so long. She was free. She was finally free. Victoria shot up, her face twisting with fury. "You little liar," she screamed, her voice wild and venomous. "You ungrateful child. After everything I did for you." Her body shook, her eyes wild, her control shattered. "She's lying. She's doing this to punish me." The judge's gavel struck sharply, his voice cold and firm. "Order in the court. Miss Turner, sit down immediately." His authority was unchallenged, his presence commanding. Victoria's mouth snapped shut, her face pale as she sank back into her chair, her eyes burning with hatred. But Isabella didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She stood tall, her head high, her voice strong. Rachel stepped forward, her voice steady and calm. "Isabella, thank you for being brave. You did the right thing." Her words were soft, warm, wrapping around Isabella like a blanket. Michael let out a sob, his body shaking as tears streamed down his face. He rushed to Isabella, his arms wrapping around her, his body trembling as he held her close. "I'm so proud of you, Bella. I'm so proud." His voice was raw, broken, his love wrapping around her, safe and warm. Isabella buried her face in his shoulder, her body shaking as she sobbed. She was free. She was finally safe. The courtroom was silent, the weight of Isabella's confession hanging heavy in the air. She stood by her father, his arms wrapped protectively around her, his tears soaking into her shoulder. She felt safe, truly safe, for the first time in years. Victoria sat frozen, her face pale, eyes wide with shock. Her perfect mask had shattered, her lies crumbling around her. She opened her mouth, her voice shaking. "Isabella, I did it all for you. I was just trying to protect you." Her words were hollow, her control slipping away. Isabella looked at her, no longer afraid. Her voice was steady, clear. "You didn't protect me. You hurt me. You lied to me. You kept me away from my dad." The truth cut through the air, final and unbreakable. Victoria's face contorted, her body shaking as she stood. "You ungrateful." Her words were venomous, wild. But the judge's gavel struck sharply, his voice firm. "Order in the court. Miss Turner, sit down immediately." His authority was absolute, his gaze hard and unyielding. Victoria sank back into her chair, her shoulders slumped, her eyes hollow. Her power was gone, her control shattered. She had lost. Rachel stood, her voice calm, unwavering. "Your Honor, given Isabella's testimony and the overwhelming evidence, we request an immediate transfer of custody." Her words were decisive, cutting through the tension. The judge's face softened as he looked at Isabella. "Isabella, do you want to live with your father?" His voice was gentle, his eyes kind. He was giving her the choice she had never been given before. Isabella's chest tightened, tears slipping down her cheeks as she looked at her father, his eyes filled with love and hope. Her voice trembled, but was strong. "Yes, I want to live with my dad." Her words were final, echoing through the room. She was free. She was finally free. The judge nodded. "Custody of Isabella Turner is awarded to Michael Anderson, effective immediately." His gavel struck. The decision final and absolute. The lie was broken. The truth had won. Victoria's face twisted, her body shaking as officers moved toward her. "You'll regret this," she screamed, her voice wild and desperate. "This isn't over." But her words were empty, her power gone. Isabella didn't look back. She kept her face buried in her father's shoulder, his love wrapping around her, safe and warm. As they left the courtroom, Isabella looked up at her father, her eyes filled with tears. "I love you, Dad," she whispered, her voice small but free. Michael's face broke, his arms tightening around her. "I love you too, Bella. I always will." His voice was raw, trembling with relief. The sunlight hit her face as they stepped outside, warm and bright. Isabella took a deep breath, the weight lifting from her chest. She was free. She was finally safe. The nightmare was over. Isabella's courage to speak the truth broke the chains of fear and deception, giving her a chance at freedom and hope. But not every child finds the strength or support to break free from such darkness. This story is a powerful reminder of the importance of listening, of believing, and of standing up for those whose voices have been silenced by fear. What would you have done in Isabella's place? Would you have found the courage to speak out, or would fear have kept you silent? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your perspective could help someone else find the courage to speak up. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you in the next story.